There comes a moment when someone gives a company the better part of their life, building the systems, carrying the responsibility, keeping everything running only to be treated like an expense the second the numbers need trimming. After 21 years, it doesn't end with gratitude. It ends with an ultimatum: hand in your resignation or get fired on the spot. People say contracts don't have feelings and businesses will protect their interests first every time. So when a company tries to pressure an employee into signing away their own rights, what's the right move? Stay quiet to keep things smooth, or stay calm. Use the law and let a single sentence decide what they truly owe. Before we dive into today's story, let us know where you're tuning in from. It's always amazing to see how far these stories travel, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss what comes next. Now I'd like to invite you to listen to his confession. My name is Briar Halden, but almost nobody at Kestrel Works calls me that. To most people on my floor, I'm Briar Bricks Halden, 31 years old, Senior Director of Enterprise Operations, headquartered in Charlotte, North Carolina. And I'm going to start with something small that anyone who's ever lived inside a corporate calendar understands in their bones. Friday afternoons. Not the normal kind when people are half out the door and Slack goes quiet and the building exhales. I mean the kind of Friday afternoon where a meeting appears on your calendar like it was always there. No context, no agenda, just a bland subject line and a time slot that feels like a trap. Those meetings don't show up because someone wants your opinion. They show up because someone wants your signature. Kestrel Works is an enterprise software company. We build and maintain ERP systems for manufacturing and logistics clients' plants that run on brutal schedules, warehouses that don't get to pause operations. Managers who call because an error in a dashboard isn't a number on a screen to them. It's a production line about to stall. It's a shipment that's about to miss a window. It's money burning in real time. That's the world I've lived in for years. My team sits across time zones and continents. We keep client systems stable. We manage the messy reality of legacy integrations. We keep vendors aligned. We handle the things nobody brags about in town halls because they're not shiny. They're just necessary. And in that world, I became something most executives don't notice until they try to remove it. I became the institutional memory. I'm the person who knows why a process exists, even when the documentation says it shouldn't. I'm the person who can find an email from 10 years ago that explains why a vendor clause was negotiated a certain way. I'm the person who remembers which client demanded the workaround, which integration broke 3 times before it stopped breaking, which temporary fix became permanent because it kept the company alive. My email archive stretches back further than most people's tenure. My vendor relationships predate half the leadership team that used to sit on the 4th floor before the acquisition. I can tell you why our reporting pipeline is built the way it is, which client will quietly leave if you disrespect the old rules, and which vendor contact still answers my call because I've never once thrown them under a bus. I'm not saying that to brag. I'm saying it because it matters. It's the reason everything that happened next wasn't personal. It was mathematical. There was one more thing that mattered too, something they never thought to read carefully because it didn't look like a weapon. My employment agreement. Not the headlines. Not the summary page. The actual language. Every clause. Every appendix. Every addendum that people sign on autopilot because they want to get back to their day. I read it like it was the only thing that would still speak for me when the room went quiet. Here's the part people always ask first, the part that has to make sense or nothing else lands. How does a 31-year-old have 21 years at the same company? I didn't fall into Kestrel Works as a polished MBA with a title. I walked into it at 16 with a cheap badge and a seasonal schedule. My first job here wasn't operations. It was basic warehouse support work that sat in the cracks between departments, the unglamorous stuff. Printing pick lists when the system hiccuped, running cables, helping a stressed-out project coordinator find the right spreadsheet before a client call. I got that job because Kestrel Works had a program for local students, and because I was the kind of kid who preferred being useful over being impressive. From there, it became co-op rotations, summer stints, early morning shifts before classes, late-night deployments that someone needed a responsible pair of hands for. Then college. Then a full-time offer. Then years where I barely noticed the calendar flipping because the work never stopped. On paper inside the HR portal, where everything is clean and bloodless, my tenure is continuous. Every phase has an employee ID, a payroll record, a trace. I never left. I just grew up inside the same system. Kestrel Works wasn't just the place that paid me. It's where I learned how companies actually breathe, how they lie, how they justify, how they decide who matters, how they pretend it's all strategy when it's really fear and ego. That's why when Betrayal Dominion Partners acquired us, I didn't need anyone to explain what was coming. The announcement day was staged like a celebration. The town hall was bright, perfect lighting, flawless slides, the kind of polished optimism that tries to make people feel lucky to be owned. The auditorium smelled like coffee and new carpet cleaner, and Cade Loring, our new CEO, stood on stage like he'd been hired for his posture alone. 35 sharp suit, perfect teeth, the kind of confidence that sounds like certainty even when it's built on nothing. He said all the right words: partnership, synergy, investment, stability. Nothing fundamental is going to change. Your positions are secure. We value the culture here. We're committed to preserving expertise. If you've worked long enough, you learn that nothing will change is corporate language for everything is about to change. And we need you calm while we set the table. Behind Cade stood Mason Quell, our new CFO. 33 eyes like they were trained to see people as line items. He didn't smile much. When he did, it didn't reach his face. He looked at the room the way someone looks at a budget that needs trimming. And then there was Rourke Vale, the new COO 37, built for authority voice that didn't invite conversation so much as demand compliance. He spoke the way people speak when they've only ever been rewarded for being unbothered by consequences. HR, of course, had a new face too, Janine Merritt. Soft tone, crisp sentences, the kind of calm that makes you feel like you're being escorted out of a building even when you're still standing inside it. I sat in the crowd and listened. I clapped at the right moments. I watched the faces around me, the older employees trying to believe it, the younger ones trying to look excited, the middle layer trying to figure out who would survive the first cut. And I went home that night and did two things. I updated my resume because denial is expensive. Then I started documenting everything because being right without proof is just a story nobody has to respect. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't emotional, it was methodical. I created folders, clean names, clear dates. I saved every email exchange that had even a hint of relevance. I took screenshots of meeting invites that appeared and disappeared. I exported calendar changes. I kept copies of policy updates. I made notes after conversations who said what, when, and where. I captured org chart revisions. I saved the versions of my job description as they existed before someone optimized them. I backed everything up in more than one place. Encrypted drives, a printed binder in a safe deposit box, a second set of hard copies at home. The rule was simple: if one day I got locked out of the system, I would still have the history. Most people don't think that way until it's too late. They assume their work will speak for them. They assume HR is neutral. They assume leadership plays fair. I didn't assume anything, because I'd seen what acquisitions do. Not just once, not just in theory. I'd watched competitor companies get gutted like fish, experienced employees removed, replaced by younger talent with cheaper salaries and smaller questions. The playbook is old and it's effective. The trick is getting people to leave voluntarily. You don't fire them if you can pressure them into signing away their rights. So that night, while my laptop hummed and my living room sat quiet, I logged into the HR portal and started pulling every document tied to my employment. Most of it was what you'd expect: benefit summaries, W-2 access, performance review, history, old acknowledgments. But buried deeper under a tab that most people never click unless they're doing taxes or disputing something was a file labeled like it was nothing. An appendix. A dusty addendum from years ago attached to my employment agreement and updated when my compensation package changed. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't bold. It didn't announce itself as important. Which is exactly why people ignore it. I opened it, read it once, then read it again, slower. I printed it not because I was dramatic, but because paper can't be deleted from a server. I slid it into a folder and wrote one word on the tab in black ink: contract. And I didn't tell anyone what I'd found. Not yet. I wasn't even sure how it would matter. I just knew it would. The first real sign they'd started moving came a few days later, and it wasn't loud. It was absence. I stopped getting copied on certain email chains, ones I'd been on for years. A strategic planning session I always attended suddenly had a new owner, and my invite got quietly removed like an error being corrected. A meeting I'd chaired for multiple quarters was canceled on my calendar with a bland note reassigned. No explanation, no conversation, no respect. Just a silent reshuffle that told me everything I needed to know. They weren't here to build. They were here to cut. And then late one afternoon I received an email with a subject line so harmless it could have been a lunch order. Operational alignment meeting. The recipient list told the real story. It was missing names. The names of the people who'd been here long enough to remember the last time the company tried to reinvent itself and nearly broke in half. The names of the people who understood the systems deeply enough to push back. The email looked clean. Innocent even. But I knew what it was. The first round. And once I saw that list, I stopped wondering if they were coming. I started counting down to when they'd reach me. The first layoffs didn't happen with a bang. They happened with polite language and locked doors. It was a Tuesday morning early enough that people were still carrying their coffee like a shield. The elevators opened and closed with the usual rhythm. But something felt different. Too many managers standing in quiet clusters, too many forced smiles, too many people checking their phones like they were waiting for instructions. By lunchtime, 15 employees were gone. Not gone in the way people quit and send a farewell email. Gone in the way the building erases them. They were called into private meetings one by one. Their badges were collected. Their laptops were handed to IT. Their accounts were disabled within hours. Slack icons went gray. Names disappeared from shared documents like they'd never been there. Janine from HR called it organizational realignment. She said it with the same calm she used when reminding people to submit open enrollment forms. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't flinch. It was clean. Efficient. Quiet. And because it was quiet, it was cruel. The people they targeted weren't the ones making mistakes. They were the ones making more money, the ones with long tenure, the ones whose knowledge didn't fit into a slide deck, and the consequences showed up immediately because Kestrelworks isn't a company where you can remove experience like a broken part and expect the machine to run. Within 48 hours, one of our oldest vendors sent an email that should have been routine a renewal confirmation with a clause question. Normally that email would have gone to Glenn, someone who'd negotiated those terms years ago and knew the vendor's patterns like muscle memory. But Glenn was one of the people realigned. No one else knew who the primary contact even was, let alone which clauses we could push back on without triggering penalties. The vendor didn't care about our internal reorg. They cared about their deadline. They cared about leverage. So the email bounced around like a hot pan. By the time it landed on my desk, the vendor was irritated and we were already behind. I fixed it because letting a relationship rot over internal politics is how companies bleed out slowly. Then a client issue hit. A manufacturing client, one of the big ones, started complaining about discrepancies in a legacy reporting module. The kind of module nobody touches because it's stitched into 5 other systems like old scar tissue. The kind of module that breaks if you look at it wrong. They weren't angry at first. Just frustrated, confused. What changed? The operations manager asked, voice tight. This report has been stable for years. The truth was simple, nothing changed in the code. What changed was the human layer. The people who knew how to interpret the quirks were gone, and Mason Quell stood at the edge of the storm like a man watching weather from behind glass. He didn't seem moved by the fact that families were losing income, that careers were being snapped in half. He seemed satisfied by the neatness of the reduction, like he'd cleaned up a messy spreadsheet. When you've been around long enough, you learn to recognize the difference between leadership and accounting. Mason wasn't leading anything. He was optimizing. And then quietly the attention shifted toward me. At first it was subtle enough that anyone could have called it coincidence. A strategic meeting I'd facilitated for years suddenly had a different host, and I found out by noticing my invite was missing. Not removed with explanation, just absent. Approval authority I'd held as part of my role routine operational decisions that kept projects moving was reassigned to someone else without a formal notice. I discovered it when a workflow bounced back with a new name in the approver field. Then came the most common trick: exclude someone from the communication and blame them for not being informed. A major client project thread moved forward without me. I wasn't copied, I wasn't tagged, I wasn't asked for input. Then in a meeting, Rourke turned his head and asked in that tone people use when they want an audience to notice your failure why I hadn't raised concerns earlier. I looked at the screen where the email chain was projected. My name wasn't on it. I could have snapped. I could have made it a scene. It would have felt satisfying for about 5 seconds. Instead, I said evenly, I wasn't included on that thread. Rourke's mouth twitched like he wanted to argue, but he didn't. He moved on, leaving the implication hanging in the air anyway. That was the point. You don't have to prove someone is incompetent. You just have to make it feel plausible. Then they introduced the replacement narrative. Tanner Wicks. 27, polished, confident, bright-eyed in that way that looks like competence from far away. His resume was clean. His speech was sharper than his understanding. He had the kind of energy leadership loves because it sounds like obedience dressed up as ambition. In a normal world, Tanner would have been mentored given time asked to learn. In this world, he was positioned. He was the fresh perspective, the modern approach, the symbol they could point to when they wanted to suggest I was the past. I met Tanner properly in a department meeting where he presented a plan to streamline our operational workflows. The plan looked good on slides. It was built on incomplete data and assumptions that only make sense if you've never had to answer a client call at 2 a.m. Halfway through the meeting, Rourke leaned back and said with a smile that wasn't quite a smile, "This is the kind of thinking we need. We can't keep clinging to the old ways." The room went still in that quiet corporate way where nobody wants to be the person who breathes wrong. Eyes flicked toward me for a fraction of a second, then away. Everyone understood who he was talking about. I didn't react. I didn't defend myself. I didn't argue. I opened my notes and wrote the sentence down exactly as he said it. Word for word, date, time, attendees. Then I kept watching. The first real break, the kind that turned suspicion into certainty, came from a mistake so simple it almost felt like the universe getting impatient. I received an email that wasn't meant for me. It wasn't a dramatic leak. It wasn't a whistleblower confession. It was a file attached to a chain that got forwarded to the wrong distribution group during a rushed back and forth. A slide deck. I opened it expecting nothing the way you open most corporate attachments. Then I saw the table. Cost tiers. Employees categorized by compensation band with notes that were supposed to be internal shorthand, the kind executives use when they think language can wash blood off numbers. There was a column with a phrase that made my stomach go cold, not because it surprised me, but because it confirmed everything. Legacy high comp, low replaceability risk. My name was there. Not under performance. Not under leadership. Not under value. Under cost. Next to it, a note that looked like someone thought they were being clever. Role can be rescoped. That was the plan. Strip responsibilities, redefine the job offer, a smaller title, lower pay, and call it alignment. When I refused or broke under pressure, they could say I chose to leave. I didn't stare at it long. I didn't let myself drift into emotion. I did what I'd trained myself to do from the first night after the town hall. I saved it. I preserved it. Then I forwarded it to Maris Calderon, my employment attorney, with one sentence in the body of the email. "They're building the trap to make me walk out on my own." Maris replied fast, as if she'd been waiting for this proof. "Good. Don't respond to anyone internally about this. Keep documenting. We'll use it when the time is right." That same night, I pulled out the folder I'd labeled contract. I reread the appendix I'd printed from the HR portal, the one most people never bothered to look at. This time I didn't read it like an employee. I read it like someone trying to survive an organized demolition. The language was clear enough to make my throat tighten. Change of control. Good reason. If a change of control occurred, an acquisition, and within a defined window my compensation or responsibilities were materially reduced, I had rights tied to that reduction. Not vague, we'll see what we can do promises. Actual contractual triggers. They were trying to push me out in the cheapest way possible. And the cheapest way was exactly what that appendix was designed to address. For the first time since the town hall, I felt something close to calm. Not relief, not happiness, just clarity. Because I finally understood the shape of the fight. It wasn't going to be won by arguing with Rourke in a meeting. It wasn't going to be won by trying to make Mason feel human. It wasn't going to be won by appealing to fairness. It was going to be won by paper and timing. The next morning, Tanner presented his streamlined operational plan to a client team. He used a dataset that was missing key variables tied to legacy integrations. It wasn't malicious. It was ignorance with confidence, a dangerous combination in our world. The client asked a simple question. Tanner answered with certainty. The certainty was wrong. It created a small but humiliating error, one of those moments where a customer doesn't explode, they just go quiet, and the quiet is worse because it means trust is shifting. I stepped in without making a show of it. I corrected the interpretation. I offered the right explanation. I smoothed the edges so the client didn't feel the fear underneath. Afterward, when the call ended, Tanner looked relieved. Rourke looked annoyed not at Tanner for being wrong, but at me for saving it too smoothly. In the debrief, Rourke said loud enough for the room to hear, "We need to let new leadership take the wheel. We can't let the past keep dragging us backward." I didn't respond. I just wrote that down too. Because by then, I wasn't trying to win their approval. I was building the record. And I could feel the pressure tightening, the slow squeeze designed to make a person quit just to breathe again. I could feel myself being pushed toward a wall, but I wasn't panicking. I had documentation. I had the cost tier slide. I had the appendix. I had timestamps and patterns and words. And then right on schedule, Mason Quell's name appeared in my inbox with a meeting invite. Friday afternoon. Subject line: Operations Restructuring Alignment. No agenda. Just a time. And the kind of silence that comes right before someone tries to end a career in 30 minutes. The meeting invite sat on my calendar like a bruise. Friday, late afternoon. A subject line so bland it could have been about printer toner operations restructuring alignment. No agenda, no pre-read. Just Mason Quell's name as the host, and a conference room location that told me exactly what this was: not a discussion, not a collaboration, but a decision that had already been made. By the time I stepped off the elevator on the executive floor, the building had that end-of-week hush to it. People were gone, or pretending to be gone. The lights felt whiter up there, like the air had been scrubbed of anything human. Mason's office sat behind a glass wall, spotless and cold, the kind of space designed to look expensive, without ever looking lived in. His assistant nodded at me without smiling. Mason didn't stand when I walked in. He stayed behind his desk, hands folded, expression neutral in a way that wasn't calm so much as controlled. "Bricks," he said, as if we were old friends and not two people on opposite sides of a line. I sat without being asked. That's a small thing, but in rooms like that, small things matter. You give up your posture, you give up the pace, you give up the feeling that you belong there. Mason leaned back slightly and started talking in that slow, rehearsed way that always signals someone is about to present a problem as a favor. "We've been reviewing operations," he said, "aligning with Betrayal's framework, standardizing roles, creating more flexibility." He talked about efficiency like it was a moral value, about right-sizing like it was a natural law. He didn't use the word cut because people who cut don't like to admit they're holding the knife. Then he slid a folder across his desk. Not shoved. Not thrown. Placed carefully. Like a gift. Inside was an offer that wasn't an offer. He called it a new role, a repositioning that would better match the evolving needs of the organization. The title was Smaller Senior Operations Coordinator, something that sounded like a step down, even if you'd never seen an org chart in your life. The job description was almost identical to what I was already doing, except the power was gone. Fewer approvals, less authority, more reporting up. Responsibilities redistributed for balance, and the salary. It was a deep cut, the kind that makes your stomach drop even if you already expected it. A number so far below my current compensation that it wasn't about budgeting. It was about humiliation. It was about making the choice feel inevitable. Mason watched my face, probably waiting for anger, pleading panic. Some sign that he could use later to paint me as unstable or unprofessional. I didn't give him any of it. I looked at the paper like I was reading a menu. I let the silence stretch just long enough to make him uncomfortable. Then I said the only thing I'd rehearsed for a moment exactly like this. I'll need time to review this. Please send it to me in writing. His eyes tightened the smallest flicker. He'd wanted me to react. He'd wanted a scene he could claim proved I was resistant. He'd wanted me to say something sharp so he could call it insubordination. Instead, I gave him a sentence that created a record and bought time. Mason tilted his head as if he was offering patience. Of course, he said. But we'd like to move quickly. There are a lot of moving parts. Understood, I said. Send it in writing. He tried again, softer. This is a good opportunity, Bricks. The company is changing. This keeps you in the fold. I looked up from the folder. I'll review it when I receive the full proposal in writing. What I didn't say, what I didn't need to say, was that a pay cut like that, paired with a title reduction and stripped authority, was not an opportunity. It was a push. A way to get me to leave without calling it a termination. A way to avoid paying what they didn't want to pay. I walked out of his office feeling nothing dramatic. No rage, no heartbreak. Just the click of a mechanism inside my head. The playbook was no longer theoretical. It had my name on it. I went back downstairs, logged into my laptop, and did what I'd been doing for weeks. I documented the moment as cleanly as possible. I wrote down his exact phrasing, the time, the setting, the numbers he'd placed in front of me, the way he'd described it as flexibility when it was clearly a trap. Then I called Maris Calderon. Maris didn't pick up on the first ring. She rarely did. She ran her practice like someone who'd learned the hard way that boundaries were survival. But she called back within 15 minutes. Tell me everything, she said. No small talk. So I did. I read her Mason's language the way you read a threatening note. I told her the title, the salary, the shift of approvals, the mention of moving quickly, the pressure wrapped in politeness. Maris was quiet for a beat. Then she said flat and certain, "That's constructive dismissal." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "They're trying to force you out," she continued. "They want you to resign voluntarily so they can avoid severance obligations, avoid any claims, and keep it clean." I stared at my desk plant, the one my team had given me last year, like it might give me an answer. "What do I do?" I asked, even though I already knew the shape of it. Maris didn't hesitate. "3 things. First, we lock down your contract and every appendix, addendum, and policy tied to change of control and good reason. Second, you build a timeline. Everyone who's been terminated, who replaced them, estimated pay bands, ages, if you can reasonably document them. Third, you don't sign anything under pressure. Not a single page. Not just acknowledging receipt. Nothing." "Got it," I said. "And Bricks," she added, voice sharpening. "They're going to try to rewrite the story. They always do. Your job is to keep the real story intact." After I hung up, I pulled up the HR portal again. I went straight to my role documentation, the job description that had lived there for years, updated occasionally, but always reflecting the level of authority I actually held. I clicked through like it was routine until my eyes caught the missing lines. The JD had been changed. Quietly. Cleanly. Without notification. Responsibilities that put me at a senior decision-making level were gone. Approval authorities were softened into collaboration. Leadership language had been replaced with support. Anything that proved I was central to operations had been diluted into something that could be re-scoped without sounding like a demotion. It was subtle enough that most people wouldn't catch it. But I'd been watching for exactly this. Because in a few weeks they'd sit across from me and say with perfectly straight faces, "Your role has shifted. The responsibilities are different. The pay aligns with the updated scope, and if I didn't have proof, it would become my word against theirs. I took screenshots of the current version. Then I pulled a copy of the older version I'd saved weeks earlier. I took screenshots of that too. I captured timestamps and metadata. I exported the page as a PDF. Then I emailed the entire bundle to Maris with a subject line that said exactly what it was. They changed my job description without notice, before and after attached. Maris replied with 2 words. Perfect. Keep going. That night, my phone buzzed with a message from Nina Park. Nina was one of my operations leads, sharp, reliable, the kind of person who could keep a client calm and a team focused at the same time. Nina didn't gossip. She didn't exaggerate. If she reached out, it was because something real was happening. Her text was short. No greeting. No filler. Be careful. They're asking HR for your performance data, not to review it, but to find language to use against you. I stared at the message for a long second. It was the confirmation I hadn't wanted but had been expecting. They weren't looking for truth. They were looking for phrases. Words that could be lifted out of context, polished, and presented as evidence of misalignment. I typed back slowly. How do you know? She replied almost immediately. I heard it in a meeting. They want something that justifies the restructure. Don't give them anything off the record. Use email. Use policy. Use documents you already have rights to access. I didn't ask her for files. Nina was already taking a risk by warning me. Asking her to cross a line would put her in danger and taint anything she provided. Instead, I thanked her. Quietly. Then I opened my folder again, the one labeled contract, and I laid the pieces out mentally like a mechanic looking at an engine. I had the cost tier slide. I had the appendix with change of control language. I had evidence they were stripping my job description. I had the pattern of exclusions and the timeline of cuts. I had Nina's warning that they were hunting for wording. What I needed next wasn't a long explanation. It wasn't a speech. It wasn't an email chain where I poured out frustration and gave them something to misuse. What I needed was a sentence. Maris had hinted at it during our call, a strategy built on timing and precision. She didn't want me charging in. She wanted me waiting, letting them take the next step, letting them expose themselves. So I started drafting something simple. Not a resignation letter yet, not in final form. Just a framework. One line that controlled when anything became real. One line that didn't argue. One line that didn't plead. One line that would force them to deal with obligations they'd been hoping to avoid. I wrote it, deleted it, rewrote it, then saved it in a folder that wasn't on my work system. I didn't send it to anyone. I didn't even print it. I just put it in position the way you place a key in a lock before you're ready to turn it. The following Monday, an email arrived in my inbox from Janine Merritt in HR. The message was short and careful. Please report to Conference Room D immediately. No greeting, no context, no explanation, and it wasn't an invitation. It was a summons. I stared at the screen for a long second, then closed my laptop with deliberate calm. I stood up, smoothed my shirt, and walked out of my office like I was going to any other meeting. Because I'd been waiting for this moment since the day Cade stood on stage and promised nothing would change. When a company forces someone to choose between resigning and being fired, they think they're closing a door. Sometimes they're opening one. The days after that HR email felt like living inside a staged photograph. Everything looked normal if you didn't know where to look. People still smiled in the hallway. Calendars still filled up. Slack still chirped. The coffee machine still hissed and sputtered like it always had. But the tone was wrong. Polite in a way that wasn't kindness. Polite in a way that felt like fear. Conversations ended too quickly when someone senior walked by. Laughter sounded a half-second late. Doors closed softly but firmly, and my calendar was being carved into something smaller. Meetings that mattered, client escalations, vendor negotiations, cross-functional sessions where decisions actually got made started disappearing from my week. Not all at once. One by one, in their place appeared check-ins. 15 minutes, 20 minutes. No agenda. A recurring slot with someone who used to work for me now touching base as if I needed supervision. It was a slow squeeze, a controlled erosion designed to make me doubt myself, doubt my position, doubt my worth, to make the job feel like a room with less and less air. I didn't panic, I didn't lash out. I shifted fully into collection mode. Because I could feel what they were building. They weren't just trying to push me out. They were trying to create a story where I deserved it. The first attempt came through operations itself, through a gap they created on purpose. One morning I got a notification that a key approval step in a deployment workflow had been reassigned. It wasn't dramatic, just a change in a drop-down field. The approver for a specific gate one that historically came through my office was now Tanner Wicks. No announcement, no email, no meeting. Just a silent transfer of responsibility. 2 days later, a major manufacturing client reported a data mismatch in an inventory reporting module tied to their supply chain forecasts. It was one of those issues that looks small until you understand what it does to a plant schedule. The numbers were off. Not by enough to trigger a total shutdown, but enough to make a client stop trusting the system. Rourke called an emergency meeting. The room was full. IT client success, a couple of project managers, Tanner sitting upright like he was about to prove himself. Me on the far side of the table watching the way Rourke's eyes moved. Rourke didn't ask, what happened? He asked, why didn't we catch this? The phrasing mattered. It was an accusation disguised as a question. Then he turned to me just slightly as if it was natural. Bricks, he said, this used to be under your oversight. Why wasn't it controlled? For a fraction of a second I felt the heat in my chest, the instinct to defend myself with words. To explain the reassignment, to point out the trap, to make it clear to everyone in the room what he was doing. But words are easy to distort. Words become tone. Words become attitude. Words become resistance. So I didn't argue. I asked one calm question. Can we pull up the workflow history for the approval change? Rourke's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The project manager fumbled through the system and pulled up the audit log. There it was, time-stamped, undeniable. The approval reassignment, the date, the exact minute, the account that made the change. It wasn't me. Rourke didn't apologize. He didn't acknowledge the implication. He just nodded as if we'd checked a box and moved on. That was how he operated. Never admit, never concede, just pivot. But the room had seen it. Not everyone would say it out loud. But they'd seen the shape of the game. After the meeting, I went back to my office and did what I'd been doing for weeks. I built the record. I exported the audit log. I saved the email chain that accompanied the workflow update. I pulled the meeting invite and wrote notes from the conversation while it was still fresh. I created a timeline date. The approval moved date, the client flagged the mismatch date, Rourke called the meeting the exact wording he used. Then I sent it all to Maris, evidence first, emotion never. While that was happening, HR started moving in parallel. I got an automated notification from the HR portal, performance documentation updated. That was the kind of message that makes your skin prickle when your file has been clean for years. I logged in immediately. Buried in the notes section where most employees never think to look was a new entry, no formal write-up. No clear incident, just vague language that sounded harmless if you weren't paying attention. Needs modernization. Resistance to new structure. May not align with evolving operational methodologies. It was poison with a smile. It wasn't specific enough to challenge easily, but it was specific enough to be cited later. A seed planted so that when they said we made difficult decisions, they could point to a pattern they'd created themselves. I took screenshots. Then I requested in writing a complete copy of my personnel file under the policy that allowed employees to access their records. I noted the timestamp of the update and compared it to the recent org chart changes. The timing wasn't random. It never is. 2 days later, the third confirmation arrived in my inbox, delivered by someone else's carelessness. An internal email chain got forwarded to a distribution group that included me. I don't know whether it was a rushed assistant, a misclick, or a panicked executive trying to move too fast. All I know is it landed where it shouldn't have. The language wasn't profane. It didn't need to be. It was corporate, measured, and cold enough to make the intent obvious. reduce legacy payroll burden, replace with lower-cost talent, normalize compensation bands. Those phrases sat on the screen like a confession written in a dialect that only executives think is invisible. My name wasn't highlighted in red. Nobody wrote, "Get rid of bricks." They were smarter than that. But there was a reference table attached, another version of the cost tier framework I'd already seen, and a single line that made my hand go still on the mouse. BH situation resolved before Q4. My initials. My timeline. My life reduced to a task on a corporate checklist. I saved the email with full headers. I exported it. I stored it offline. I preserved metadata the way Maris had taught me, because in a fight like this, I saw it as never enough. Not long after, I ran into Nina near the break room. She didn't stop. She didn't look at me for long. She kept walking like we were strangers passing in a hallway. But as she passed, she said low enough that only I could hear, "They've got a folder. The same folder they used on the others." I kept my face neutral. "What kind of folder?" Her eyes flicked once, quick and sharp. "Resignation papers. Release language. Severance that's identical for everyone. They give you a deadline so you'll sign without reading. Don't." She didn't wait for my response. She kept moving. That was Nina's gift to me. Not documents, not leaks. A warning timed precisely, delivered in a way that couldn't be traced. I went back to my office and sat down with a strange calm settling over me, because now I had the full shape of it. They were building a case. They were creating gaps in oversight and trying to pin operational failures on me. They were rewriting my personnel file. They were speaking about reducing legacy payroll like it was a public service. They were preparing a standard severance folder to push across a table and act like it was generous. And they were doing it all with the assumption that I would be tired enough, scared enough, or ashamed enough to take the easiest exit. So I upgraded my strategy. That night, Maris and I went through my contract line by line on a secure call. We didn't talk about feelings. We talked about triggers, definitions, time windows, obligations, base pay through lawful separation, accrued PTO, expense reimbursements, bonus language and payout conditions, equity and change of control vesting, severance tied to good reason within the defined period after acquisition, attorney fees, penalties for late payment where applicable. I built a spreadsheet with multiple tabs, each one a category, each line item tied to documentation, contracts, policy pages, emails, performance metrics, client revenue numbers, anything that could anchor a claim in reality. It wasn't glamorous work. It wasn't satisfying in the moment. It was armor. By the end of the week, I received another email, this one from an executive assistant, the kind of message written to look routine while carrying a blade. "Please meet in conference room C at 3:15 p.m. No context, no agenda. Just a time and a room. I stared at it and felt something shift inside me. Not fear. If anything, it was the opposite, the sensation of watching a train arrive exactly where the tracks said it would. Because I wasn't guessing anymore. I wasn't hoping they'd change their minds. I wasn't waiting for fairness to show up. I'd stopped expecting them to be decent. And once you stop expecting decency, you can plan with clarity. I opened the folder on my personal drive where the short letter sat still, unnamed, still not printed. I read the sentence again slowly. I made one small adjustment, not to make it dramatic, but to make it precise. Then I closed the file. I didn't print it yet. I just left it there ready. And I told myself the same thing I'd been telling myself since the day Cade promised stability under bright lights. When they tried to force me to choose between resigning and being fired, they believed they were controlling the outcome. What they didn't understand was that I'd already started writing the rules they were about to step into. The morning of the meeting, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Short messages, careful ones. The kind people send when they already know the answer but need to ask anyway. "Everything okay? Hey man, you good? Just checking in." I didn't respond to any of them. Maris had been clear the night before. Once they moved to a formal meeting with HR present, silence becomes strategy. Anything I said to coworkers could be twisted into admissions, state of mind, or intent. So I let the messages stack up unanswered and focused on the only things that mattered. I printed my employment agreement, the full version, not the summary, not the onboarding copy, every page, every appendix. I printed the change of control addendum and the section tied to good reason. I printed snapshots from the HR portal showing the altered job description and the newly added performance notes. I printed them because paper can't be edited after the fact. And then I printed one more thing. A single sentence. I folded it carefully and slipped it into the inside pocket of my jacket where it sat flat against my ribs like something alive. The walk to conference room C felt longer than it should have. Not because I was nervous, but because the building was quiet in a way that made every footstep echo. When I pushed the door open, the scene inside confirmed everything I already knew. Cade Loring sat at the head of the table, posture perfect, hands folded like he was about to deliver condolences. Mason Quell sat to his right, jaw tight, eyes sharp. Rourke Vale leaned back slightly, arms crossed, already bored with the outcome. Janine Merritt from HR sat at the far end, notepad open, pen aligned, expression neutral in that practiced way HR professionals learn early. They were all on one side of the table. I was alone on the other. On the table between us were folders, pens, and a neatly printed resignation letter with my name already typed at the bottom. Cade started, voice smooth, sympathetic, rehearsed. "Bricks, thank you for coming in. We appreciate your time today." He spoke slowly, carefully, as if every word had been approved by counsel. "As you know, the company is undergoing restructuring following the acquisition. We've taken a hard look at our leadership model and where we need to go moving forward. These decisions weren't made lightly." He paused, letting the silence do some of the work. "We've decided it's time to move in a different direction." Mason slid the folder toward me with 2 fingers. "We're offering you 2 paths," he said. "Option 1. You resign effective immediately. We'll provide a small severance package and a neutral reference. Clean exit." Rourke leaned forward just enough to be seen. "Option 2, he added. We terminate your employment as part of the restructure. No severance. And we document it accordingly." The message was clear even without the words. Resign or be fired. Cade nodded, as if this were all very reasonable. "This is the best way to leave with dignity," he said. I didn't open the folder. I didn't touch the pen. I didn't look at the resignation letter they'd prepared for me. Instead, I looked at them. "I don't agree with your assessment," I said calmly. Cade tilted his head. "Are you saying you don't believe you're aligned with the new model?" "I'm saying I don't agree that my role is redundant," I replied. "And I don't agree that the conclusions you're drawing reflect my performance or responsibilities." Mason jumped in quickly, the way people do when they want to steer the conversation away from substance. "This isn't about fault, it's about fit." "Then please put all proposals in writing," I said. "I'll review them." Janine glanced at the clock on the wall. "You have 30 minutes, she said evenly. Mason tapped the pen against the table. "This is a formality. Just sign, and we can all move on." That was the moment I recognized exactly where I was. The same room others had been led into. The same language, the same pressure, the same artificial urgency designed to shut down careful thought. I took a breath and said the sentence that made the air change. "I'll resign." The reaction was immediate. Cade's shoulders relaxed. Mason exhaled like someone who'd just won a hand he thought might go bad. Rourke smiled barely. Janine slid the resignation letter closer to me and offered the pen. "Sign here," she said. I raised a hand, stopping the motion. "I'll write my own resignation." The room froze. Cade blinked. "We've already prepared one that covers the necessary legal resignation as a personal statement," I said, keeping my voice steady. "If you're dictating the language I'm allowed to use, then it's not voluntary." Silence. This was the moment they had to choose between control and appearance. If they forced their document on me, they'd expose the coercion they were so carefully trying to hide. Cade nodded slowly. "Fine," he said. "You can write your own. But we need it today." You'll have it before the end of business, I replied. I stood, collected my papers, and walked out of the room. Behind me, they were already celebrating quietly. I could feel it. They thought I'd folded. They thought this was done. Back in my office, I locked the door and opened the file I'd prepared with Maris. The sentence sat there unchanged. Clean. Exact. My resignation would be effective upon full settlement of all compensation benefits and amounts owed under my employment agreement and applicable law. Nothing more, nothing less. I printed it, signed it in blue ink, scanned it with a timestamp, made copies for my records. At 4:17 p.m., I walked back into conference room C and handed the letter to Cade. He skimmed it, barely reading. Mason glanced at the signature. Janine nodded and took it into her folder. HR will process everything she said. You'll receive details later. I'll need written confirmation of all payments timelines and what's included, I said. We'll follow up, Mason replied dismissively. I left without another word. I packed my personal items into a box, ignored the messages lighting up my phone, and walked out to the parking lot as the sun dropped low over Charlotte. I didn't leave the company. I set the condition for leaving, and they accepted it, without understanding what they'd just agreed to. 5 days later, the phone rang. It was a quiet morning. I was standing in my kitchen, coffee still steaming, when my phone vibrated on the counter. An unfamiliar number, Charlotte area code. I answered on the 4th ring. This is Briar Halden. Mr. Halden, the voice said. This is Grant Huxley, General Counsel for Vantrell Dominion Partners. His tone wasn't aggressive. It wasn't friendly either. It was controlled, careful, like someone walking through a room filled with glass. I'm calling about your resignation letter. I waited. There's some confusion about the language you used, he continued. Specifically the phrase, effective upon full settlement. Can you explain what you meant by that? I took a sip of coffee and set the mug down. It means exactly what it says, I replied. My resignation becomes effective when I receive full settlement. There was a pause. So until then, Grant said slowly, you believe. Until then, I remain an employee, I said, with all associated rights and benefits. Silence. I could hear paper moving, someone whispering. The sound of a team of lawyers reading a sentence they should have caught the first time. Can you repeat that? Grant asked. My resignation is conditional, I said, repeating it exactly. No full settlement, no effective resignation. Another pause, longer this time. And what do you consider full settlement? He asked. I'm glad you asked. I opened the spreadsheet Maris and I had built. First, I said base salary through the effective date. Second, accrued PTO. Third, outstanding reimbursements. I listed the numbers calmly, deliberately keeping the total modest. That's the baseline, I said. Grant exhaled audibly. And beyond that, I continued. There's my performance bonus under the employment agreement. There's equity vesting triggered by the change of control. And there's severance tied to good reason given the reduction in compensation and responsibilities. I named the totals without embellishment. Silence again. He knew what those numbers meant. This is substantial, Grant said. It's contractual, I replied, and lawful. And if we dispute this, he asked. Then I remain employed, I said evenly. Salary accrues. Benefits continue. And we litigate, at which point discovery will include cost-tier documents, altered job descriptions, internal emails, and timelines of terminations. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't threaten. I stated facts. Grant didn't argue. He thanked me and ended the call. 3 minutes later, my phone rang again. Mason. He didn't bother with greetings. What did you do? He demanded. I resigned, I said calmly. You tricked us. I wrote a legally valid resignation letter, I replied. You accepted it. You're not still an employee, he snapped. I am until you pay what you owe, I said. That's how the sentence works. I heard his breathing change. Faster, shallower. We'll be in touch, he said, and hung up. An hour later, my work email access was restored. They had finally understood the problem, and now they were running the numbers. The shift happened fast. Less than 24 hours after Grant Huxley ended our call, the company's tone changed completely. It wasn't subtle. It was abrupt, like someone slamming the brakes after realizing they'd been speeding toward a cliff. An automated email hit my inbox first. Access restored per legal review. My work account email, internal systems, shared drives, everything that had gone dark was suddenly back online. A few minutes later, a short message followed from HR. "We are reviewing final compensation obligations. We will be in touch." That was it. No apologies. No explanations. Just confirmation that someone inside Ventrell's legal team had finally said the words nobody wanted to hear he's still employed. Locking me out while my resignation wasn't effective would only deepen the hole they'd already dug. I didn't respond to anyone internally. Not a single coworker. Not a single manager. Not even Nina. Maris had drilled this into me. Once lawyers are involved, silence isn't avoidance. It's discipline. Everything went through Maris. Everything went through email. Everything left a trail. By the end of the day, curiosity got the better of me. I logged into my restored mailbox, fully expecting to see the usual noise. What I didn't expect was to find an internal thread sitting there like a dropped wallet. The subject line made my pulse slow instead of spike. Urgent Halden resignation language exposure. It was a chain that never should have survived the access restoration. Too many people. Too much panic. Too much honesty written in the rushed shorthand executives use when they believe nobody outside the circle will ever read it. I opened it carefully. Someone had written plainly that they had accepted my resignation without reviewing the language. Another person flagged potential exposure related to good reason and change of control provisions. A third warned explicitly not to create written records about intent or pressure. Do not put anything in writing that suggests coercion. They weren't confused. They weren't ignorant. They knew exactly what they'd done and exactly how bad it could get. I exported the thread in its original format, saved the headers, captured the timestamps, stored it offline with everything else. It wasn't leverage to wave around. It was insurance. That afternoon, Grant tried again. "This doesn't need to be complicated," he said over the phone, his voice measured but tighter than before. "If you'll just confirm that your resignation is effective immediately, we can release severance as discussed." "I've already been clear," I replied. "All communication goes through my attorney. And my resignation already states when it becomes effective." "There's nothing further to clarify?" he asked. "No," I said. "There isn't." I hung up and forwarded a short summary to Maris. The first settlement proposal arrived the next morning. It came dressed up in formal language and good intentions. Full and final. Take it or leave it. A generous gesture to avoid prolonged dispute. A deadline attached to make it feel urgent. The number looked large if you didn't know what it excluded. That was the trick. It counted base pay, unused PTO reimbursements, and a severance amount that barely rose above what they'd offered everyone else. It left out the things that mattered. Bonus language tied to performance, equity vesting triggered by acquisition, severance linked to reduced responsibilities and pay, attorney fees. They'd redefined full settlement to mean whatever was cheapest for them. Maris and I went line by line. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't editorialize. She simply pointed out where they'd replaced contractual definitions with their own convenient versions. They weren't negotiating yet. They were testing. So we responded with structure. The demand package we sent back didn't sound emotional or angry. It sounded boring, corporate, unavoidable. A summary table broke down every category of compensation. Each line referenced the exact clause or appendix that supported it. Performance metrics backed the bonus calculation. Vesting language supported the equity. Dates aligned with the change of control window. We included payment method, timeline, wire instructions. At the top, one sentence set the tone. This request reflects contractual obligations. No additional compensation is sought. Then we waited. That was the part they hated most. Every day that passed without payment meant I remained employed. Salary accrued. Benefits remained active. Retirement contributions continued. Each delay increased their cost and deepened their exposure. I didn't phrase it as a threat. I phrased it as a fact. The meter is running. The second offer came 2 days later. Higher, more careful, still incomplete. This time they tried to draw a line around something else. No letter of recommendation from the CEO, neutral reference only. That told me exactly where their fear had shifted. Money was one thing, reputation was another. They'd already planted language in my HR file suggesting I was outdated, resistant, misaligned. A neutral reference would quietly preserve that narrative. It would let them say nothing publicly while letting the implication linger. I wouldn't allow that. Maris sent the response. A letter of recommendation on company letterhead signed by the CEO confirming performance and contribution. Mutual non-disparagement. Full payment as defined by the contract. Attorney fees included. Nothing extra, nothing punitive. Just clean closure. Grant replied late that evening. We'll return with a final proposal. I read it once, then closed my laptop. They could argue numbers all they wanted, but they couldn't argue the sentence they'd already accepted. And once they understood that there was only one way out. Grant called close to 9 that night. His voice had changed again. No hedging, no positioning, just finality. We're prepared to resolve this, he said. They agreed to wire payment within a defined window, all categories. Attorney fees included. A settlement agreement with mutual non-disparagement and confidentiality. A letter of recommendation signed by Cade Loring. Power had shifted. They knew it. I knew it. The draft agreement arrived the next morning. It was long, dense, familiar language wrapped around one dangerous sentence. Employee confirms resignation was voluntary and effective as of August 4th. Maris caught it immediately. That clause breaks everything, she said. If you sign this as, is you erase the condition that protected you. We revised it without drama. Resignation effective upon receipt of full settlement as defined herein. No retroactive dates, no reinterpretation, no quiet rewriting of history. Then I asked for one more thing. A separation classification confirming resignation pursuant to settlement with no negative designation. Maris didn't question it. She understood exactly why. I'd watched them alter records before. I wasn't leaving space for ambiguity. They pushed back once, lightly. Then they agreed. The wire hit my account on a Wednesday afternoon. No ceremony, just a bank notification and a balance change. Later that day, a FedEx envelope arrived. Inside was the letter on corporate letterhead, Cade's signature clean and unmistakable at the bottom, praising my contributions and leadership. I didn't smile. I didn't celebrate. I exhaled. After Maris reviewed the final agreement I signed. Only then did my resignation become effective, exactly as the sentence had always required. Weeks later, stories drifted back to me. A major client left after repeated reporting failures. A vendor relationship collapsed because nobody knew who to call. Implementation timelines slipped. Errors multiplied. I felt no satisfaction in it, just recognition. Systems fail when memory is removed. Cade didn't last the year. Mason left under pressure. Rourke stayed longer absorbing the fallout. As for me, I started consulting. Carefully, selectively, charging by the hour. People reached out. Quietly. People in similar situations facing the same polite pressure, the same folders, the same deadlines. I told them what mattered. Read the contract. Document everything. Never sign in panic. Sometimes winning isn't about hurting anyone. It's about making sure the rules apply to everyone. Brix's story ends here, but what it leaves behind stays with us a little longer. Sometimes the hardest part isn't the moment the door closes, it's the quiet right after when you realize how easily loyalty can be mistaken for permission. And still, we don't have to become colder because the world can be. We can stay clear-eyed without losing our decency. We can protect what we've earned, set boundaries that don't require shouting, and move forward without turning bitterness into a home. If this confession hit something tender in you, you're not alone. There are so many people walking around with a story they've swallowed just to keep the peace. Maybe tonight we all remember that dignity isn't a dramatic victory. It's a steady choice to know our worth and speak with care even when the room doesn't deserve it. If you'd like to stay with this kind of storytelling, I'd love for you to subscribe just as a way to be part of a space where we listen, reflect, and share without judgment. And if you want to leave a few lines in the comments about what part stayed with you, or simply tell me what city you're watching from. Thank you for being here with us. I'll see you in the next story.